I love the story in the first reading from first book of Kings, the story of Elijah and Elisha. Elisha today, the call of Elisha. And I recommend it to you. Elijah was a great prophet of the northern kingdom in Samaria, but the kingdom of Israel. But he was not beloved by Ahab the king or Queen Jezebel, his wife, and came as close as anyone can to being murdered by them. He escaped several times, and you've heard the story, but I suggest you read it again. It's a powerful story of victory and then all of a sudden defeat. Elijah was able to defeat all those prophets of Baal, and then Jezebel said, you know what? If you're not dead tomorrow, it won't be because I didn't try. So you remember that he goes off very depressed, doesn't want to live. Elijah, that is. He doesn't even want to eat. And the angel comes and feeds him, gives him water, and then he still doesn't want to live. The angel comes back, food and water. And he gets to the mountain, and one of the things where he discovers the Lord in the softness of a breeze, and that's what he's commissioned to go and commission Elisha as his successor, his understudy, so to speak. So the reading today picks up, and I love the way he calls it. He simply takes off his mantle and he throws it over Elisha while he's plowing. And Elisha understands, you heard the story, I don't need to repeat it to you, that he says, I'm ready to go. And he says, well, I'm going to go. And Elijah says, look, I give you, do what you need. This is a free call. So Elisha goes back and in the more dramatic way of changing your life, he slaughters the oxen. He uses the wooden plow to cook them. And then he feeds it to the other farm workers. Well, there was no choice after that, right? It's like making your life by a computer and just chucking it in the water and saying, without a backup. It's like, well, that's it, I mean, it's pretty dramatic, He couldn't go home again after that, right? He destroyed his means of making a living, and he was followed. But I love the story. I would suggest it to you to read it for yourself and kind of think about it, because it underlines that being called to serve God is really hugely demanding, especially for Elijah, especially for Elisha. And the story goes on. I'm not going to tell you how it ends, except it's in one of the windows of this church. When Elijah finally is taken up to heaven in a fiery chariot, he leaves that mantle for Elisha. It's that last window there in back. Looks like him going up to heaven. When they were planning these windows 30 years ago, he said, we've got to have something like that. And also David dancing before the Ark of the Covenant. So, at any rate, sometimes you get what you want, So that's... But the invitation to us then is made even clearer in the gospel today. When Jesus says that he doesn't have any place to lay his head, how obvious is that? Because he had just planned to stay in this village, and they told him to get out of town because he was going to Jerusalem. Already we see that the opposition is building to it. And less and less and less does he have a place in this world, so to speak, Jesus. So when James and John, say, Lord, let's call down fire from heaven on this evil village. Jesus turns and rebukes them and says, I'm not into this. I'm into road rage. I'm not into vengeance. And keeps on. But it is true then, when you follow him like Elijah followed God, or Elisha after Elijah, there's a kind of a radical choice. We don't know where it'll lead. And that's that's why I must admit, most of us are reluctant to follow. You know, I mean, it is true, is it not? That we say, wait a second. How many times have people said, and I even thought to myself, if I say yes, where will the Lord lead me? Where would it end up? Better to be half a Christian. Better to just go to church on Sunday and not, let's take our faith in half steps, so to speak. But then, of course, but you see an urgency. You remember Elijah said to Elisha said, I need to go home and say goodbye. Elijah said, what am I? Do what you want. Jesus says, let me go and bury my family. He says, let the dead bury their dead. You come and proclaim the gospel. There's an urgency, much more urgency in his request. And then he says, to the other person, he says, I want to say farewell to my family. I've got family responsibilities. He says, look, if you put your hand to the plow and keep looking back, you're not worthy of the kingdom of God. Why? So many of us live with the regrets of the life that we coulda, shoulda, woulda lived, right? That we're constantly looking back and we're constantly paralyzed by the regrets or the rethinking. Jesus says, today, right now, is when salvation comes. What's the point of looking back yesterday? Unless you're going to learn for something for today. Right now, this morning, this Sunday, June 30th. That's the looking back, you get paralyzed. Paralyzed by what you did or what people did to you. He says, forget it. Forget it. And also then it's pointless, he doesn't say it, but it's pointless to live in the far future. He does point out in another place, can you change, put 1 second more on your life? By worrying about it. So he's very much saying now is the time to live and proclaim the gospel in our lives. This Sunday, right now, this is our possibility. And I love then the second reading. He's talking about discipleship, but in the terms of freedom. This is like manna to an American ear. Saying freedom. Wow, that's just exactly what we want. But of course, we Americans, we're kind of mesmerized. Well, freedom is to make a telephone call without the NSA listening, right? Or freedom is the right to bear arms. I was reminded my uncle, shortly after that Newtown massacre in Connecticut, in Charlottesville, where I come from, my uncle was saying that the local supermarket is called Kroger's, and some guy enters the supermarket with a fully loaded automatic rifle, slung, enters. He terrified her. It's perfectly legal, by the way, in Virginia. I suppose you can bring your automatic rifle to church. I think it's legal in Virginia, but terrified. That's freedom, huh? He says, I'm an exercise. People were terrified, so they called the police. The police said, oh, this is legal. You can carry that rifle anywhere you want. Freedom. That's not what Paul's talking about. That's not what Jesus is talking about. The freedom that Paul is talking about is the freedom to serve. A more radical, a deeper, a more embracive, a more human freedom. The freedom to love. Imagine the freedom to love your neighbor. A freedom to love the neighbor who hates you. That's exactly what Jesus was. A freedom to be without revenge. The Samaritan village tells him to go on. He says, I'm not into that. That's real freedom. We all know how blinding feelings of hurt and vengeance can be. Real freedom is the freedom to love no matter what. The freedom to go to the cross. The freedom to live without surety. The freedom to live without regret. The freedom to live in the present moment. The love of Christ. That's the call that we receive. That's the call we receive every day. And And so I invite myself, obviously, because I need to relearn this lesson over and over again, but I invite you. This is your birthright. This is my birthright. To live, as Paul says, in real freedom. Do not use this freedom as an opportunity for the flesh. Rather, serve one another. He says the whole law is fulfilled in one statement, namely, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. So I say to you, live by the Spirit, and you will certainly not gratify the desire of the flesh. But you will live in the Spirit with freedom of mind. It's your birthright, it's mine. Let us accept that call. Let us grab that mantle. Let us follow Christ.